Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping right into something really critical, artificial intelligence, and specifically how it's affecting Black Americans.
Yeah, it's a huge topic.
We've got this white paper exploring the impact of AI on Black Americans, looking at policy considerations for the Congressional Black Caucus, our goal, to pull out the essential stuff you need to know fast.
Kind of a shortcut to getting up to speed on some, well, pretty complex and maybe surprising aspects of AI in Black communities.
Exactly. And what jumps out right away is this tension, this duality.
Totally. AI isn't just this neutral tool rolling out. It offers, huge opportunities,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it carries some really significant risks, especially for Black Americans.
You're talking generative AI, AI in medicine, healthcare, education.
Right, the whole gamut.
Okay, so let's tackle that idea first, that technology isn't neutral. The paper brings in work by people like Dorothy Roberts and Simone Brown.
Hmm.
And they remind us that tech often just reflects or even makes worse the biases we already have in society, race being a big one.
Absolutely. It's not starting from a blank slate. And you see that even in how AI fundamentally understands race.
So,
Well, the paper points out that AI systems often use these very fixed, rigid categories for race, like the U.S. Census boxes.
right, simple classifications.
But race isn't simple. As Michelle Elam's work highlights, these boxes just can't capture the lived reality, the social and cultural complexity, or how race intersects with everything else.
So the problem isn't just a bug in the code, it's deeper. It's in how AI is even set up to see something like race, which is, socially constructed.
Precisely. So in this deep dive, we'll break that down across three main areas:
Mhm.
generative AI, then medicine and healthcare, and finally education.
And we should note, the paper mentions AI in policing and surveillance, too, obviously huge for Black communities.
Crucial areas, yeah. But they've been covered pretty extensively elsewhere, so today we're focusing on these other, maybe less discussed, but equally vital sectors.
Okay, let's start with generative AI. What exactly are we talking about?
Right. So these are the algorithms, the programs that can actually create original content. You give them a text prompt and they generate something new.
Like ChatGPT writing text.
Exactly. Or Stable Diffusion making images, Whisper doing audio transcription, even image and video clips or creating video clips. It's that kind of tech.
And on the surface, the possibilities sound, well, pretty amazing.
For sure. The paper talks about potential uses like AI virtual assistants, helping with design prototypes, new ways for people to create content.
And boosting productivity. I think I saw something about that.
Yeah, definitely. Boosting worker productivity, maybe even helping upskill workers in roles that don't typically require like advanced degrees.
Okay.
There's some MIT research mentioned it showed real gains for people like marketers, grant writers, and another study found customer support agents got a lot better with AI helping them out.
Hmm. Okay, so real potential there. What about specifically for creative expression?
That's a really interesting angle. There's this hope that generative AI could, lower the barriers for Black creators, give them tools, a platform to get their voices out there more easily.
Makes sense. But there's always a but, isn't there?
Huh, yeah. Here's where it gets tricky. The paper flags some big challenges to, our current ideas about copyright and who owns what.
Right, I've heard about lawsuits.
Exactly. There are ongoing legal fights and this whole debate about whether AI should be trained on artists' work without, asking them first or paying them.
So is there a risk of exploitation here?
A very real one.
Yeah.
The paper mentions Perry A. Hall's concept. He calls it virtual strip mining of Black creative labor.
Wow. Explain that.
Well, because these AIs learn styles and patterns from massive amounts of data, they could essentially absorb the unique styles of Black artists.
And then replicate them or build on them without giving any credit or compensation back.
Precisely. The stylistic elements get carried over from the training data. And without clear rules or laws, creators, especially underrepresented ones, might find their work devalued or kind of suppressed.
Feels like a digital version of old problems.
It could be, yeah. And then there's the whole issue of information integrity.
Yeah.
Meaning, as AI gets better at creating content that looks totally human-made, it gets harder for us, for the public, to trust what we see online.
People can't tell the difference
The
anymore.
research shows it's becoming really difficult, yeah, which obviously erodes public trust.
And opens the door for misuse, disinformation, propaganda.
Blackmail even. We've already seen those super realistic AI images of political figures or the Pope going viral. They seem funny maybe, but the potential for harm is serious.
And for Black communities specifically.
Well, think about activists sharing videos of, say, police misconduct. If everyone starts thinking anything can be faked,
Then legitimate evidence might just be dismissed as fake.
exactly. It creates this kind of unwarranted skepticism. And adding to that worry, some research suggests the tools meant to detect deepfakes actually work worse on non-Caucasian faces.
Oh, great. Another layer of bias. Which brings us to bias and discrimination more broadly. It seems like it's almost built into these systems sometimes.
It often is.
Yeah.
Generative models have been shown repeatedly to reproduce harmful stereotypes. The paper gives examples from Stable Diffusion generating, frankly, violent and sexualized images reinforcing biases against minority groups.
And the paper connects that to dehumanization.
Yes, citing research on implicit bias, like in the criminal justice system. Constant exposure to negative stereotypes, even AI-generated ones, isn't harmless. It can be internalized, cause psychological distress, and even undermine how people do in school or at work.
And we see this bias popping up in other areas too, right? Like finance?
Absolutely. Documented cases of AI amplifying biases in financial services, housing. There was that mortgage lending system using AI that ended up charging higher rates to Black and Hispanic borrowers.
So, switching gears a bit to economic opportunity. AI could boost productivity overall. Goldman Sachs' estimate was pretty big.
Huge potential boost to GDP, yeah. But the big question is, who benefits?
Right, because the paper points out that Black Americans are, well, underrepresented in the AI industry itself.
Seriously underrepresented. The 2018 data for big tech companies wasn't great, and that BLCK VC survey showed very few Black investors in the venture capital side of things.
And the pipeline isn't exactly overflowing either, based on computer science graduates in 2021.
Right, relatively low percentages there too. So yes, tech training and upskilling programs are needed, but the paper stresses you also have to tackle the systemic stuff like hiring practices that exclude people or unfair pay.
Plus, there's the automation risk.
A big one. Generative AI could automate parts of many jobs, and Black workers are unfortunately overrepresented in occupations often seen as more vulnerable to automation, like truck drivers, food service, certain clerical roles.
Which could make existing wealth gaps even wider.
That's the fear. Although, to be fair, the paper does bring back that MIT and customer support research.
Suggesting AI could also help workers augment their skills.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially maybe helping lower skilled workers gain new capabilities. So it's not entirely a negative picture on the economic front, but the risks are definitely there.
Okay, one last point on generative AI, the environmental cost. That's often overlooked.
Massively overlooked, usually. But training these huge AI models takes an incredible amount of energy. We're talking significant carbon emissions.
Like for just one model.
Yeah, the paper mentions the Bloom model as an example with a pretty hefty estimated carbon footprint. And it's not just energy, it's water, too.
Water.
Huge amounts of fresh water needed for cooling the data centers. GPT-3's training reportedly used a staggering amount.
Oh.
And the kicker is, who usually bears the brunt of environmental damage?
Marginalized communities.
Yeah.
Environmental racism.
Exactly. And the paper points to this emerging issue with AI, specifically data centers being built in hotter, drier places where water use is less efficient, potentially hitting those communities harder. It's like a new form of environmental inequity.
Okay, that's a lot on generative AI.
Uh,
Let's shift now to medicine and healthcare. Again, the paper sees promise, but also big concerns about safety and equity.
right. The potential upside is pretty exciting, especially in things like medical imaging.
How so?
AI is getting really good at spotting patterns in x-rays, mammograms, brain scans, helping doctors diagnose things like blood clots or tumors earlier and maybe more accurately.
Is there evidence for that?
Yeah, the paper mentions an NYU study where AI helped radiologists improve breast cancer detection, and importantly, with fewer false positives. That kind of thing could literally save lives.
That's huge. But the catch is,
The data. Always the data. These tools have to be trained on diverse data sets that actually reflect everyone they'll be used on. Otherwise, they won't work as well for certain groups.
so bias creeps in again if the training data isn't representative.
Exactly. Then there's precision medicine.
Personalized treatments.
That's the vision, yeah. Using AI to tailor treatments based on your specific genes, medical history, environment, social factors, everything.
Which could, in theory, reduce racial disparities if treatments aren't based on broad, potentially flawed race adjustments.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
Moving away from those problematic race correction algorithms. But,
Here comes the but again.
right. The concern is that the super personalized medicine might only be available to, the wealthy.
Hmm.
which could actually widen health gaps.
Making disparities worse instead of better.
Potentially. And there's also a risk of focusing too much on the fancy AI solutions and ignoring the basic structural problems, poverty, lack of access, environmental factors that drive health inequities in the first place.
Okay, what about the less glamorous side, like hospital operations?
AI is being used there too. Scheduling, allocating staff, assigning beds. It can help manage resources like figuring out vaccine distribution fairly.
Sounds useful. Any problems?
Well, Stanford research showed AI influencing healthcare pricing, which is complex. But the really stark example the paper gives is that AI risk assessment tool.
Right. Tell me about that one again.
So, this tool was widely used to predict which patients needed extra care resources, but it systematically underestimated the needs of Black patients.
Why? What went wrong?
Because the algorithm used cost of care as a shortcut, a proxy for how sick someone was. And historically, because of systemic bias, less money has been spent on healthcare for Black patients.
So the AI learned that bias.
Hmm.
It learned that Black patients' lower cost is less sick.
Essentially, yes. It learned that historical spending pattern, which was discriminatory, and baked it into its predictions.
And the result was Black patients didn't get flagged for the extra help they actually needed.
Exactly. It prioritized effectively cost savings over patient need, and Black Americans were disproportionately harmed. It's a really clear example of the dangers.
Wow. Okay, let's move to our third area,
Yeah.
education. The paper says generative AI, like ChatGPT, is fundamentally shaking things up.
Big time. It forces a rethink of how we even assess learning, doesn't it? If AI can write essays, what does an essay assignment even test anymore?
Good point. So the focus needs to shift.
Towards those 21st century skills, yeah. Critical thinking, evaluating information, solving complex problems, things AI currently struggles with.
And the paper stresses involving educators and communities.
Absolutely. Especially underserved communities. Co-designing these tools seems critical if we want them to be equitable. There's potential for AI to help under-resourced students, but it needs to be done right.
Which raises questions for policymakers, right? Like,
Right.
who gets the tech? Is the infrastructure there for everyone?
All crucial questions, because history shows new tech often makes inequality worse if we're not careful.
So how could AI potentially help bridge achievement gaps?
Well, think about adaptive learning tools. AI could tailor lessons specifically for each student's pace and needs.
That could be great for kids with learning disabilities or non-native speakers.
Neurodivergent students, gifted students. Yeah, lots of potential benefits. Even AI-powered assistive devices, like for autism support.
But the paper adds some caution there too.
It does. Concerns about, just throwing more devices into classrooms and the potential for exploitation by big tech companies wanting student data?
Right. Data privacy is always lurking.
Always. But on the plus side, maybe AI could make learning more engaging, more interactive, maybe gamified lessons.
Possibly. And AI feedback tools could help teachers maybe improve student learning.
There's hope for that.
Right.
And even generative AI could potentially help teach creativity and critical thinking in new ways. But again, risks remain. Like the AI pushing a sort of homogenized mainstream language or culture, and those harmful stereotypes we talked about earlier potentially showing up in educational AI data sets too.
Okay, what about AI for predicting student success or failure?
Yeah, that's another proposed use, using AI to forecast performance, identify students who might be struggling early on so schools can intervene.
Sounds good in principle, but
But the risk is huge that these predictions just encode historical biases. If certain groups have historically underperformed due to systemic issues, the AI might just learn to flag those students.
leading to stigma, lowered expectations.
Exactly. Potential stigmatization, exclusion, kids internalizing negative expectations. It raises really serious ethical questions about whether we should even use tools like that.
And concerns about college admissions algorithms, too.
Yeah, worries that they might discriminate or maybe prioritize things like how likely a student is to enroll or their ability to pay over their actual potential.
Okay, one last area in education. Classroom monitoring.
Yeah. Using things like video analytics, behavioral biometrics to track attendance, even attention levels.
Like the systems used for remote exam proctoring, facial recognition and all that.
Similar tech, yeah. And we know facial recognition has real problems, particularly with accuracy for people with darker skin.
So aside from being inaccurate, it feels invasive.
Deeply. Concerns about students just feeling constantly watched, surveilled, and the worry that even AI learning tools could start to feel like surveillance.
And could it worsen things like the school-to-prison pipeline?
That's a serious concern raised in the paper, yeah. If AI is flagging certain behaviors based on biased data or assumptions, it really highlights the need for clear ethical lines, rules about data, and letting students opt out.
So wrapping this all up, it really is this profound duality for Black communities when it comes to AI.
Absolutely. You see this clear potential to maybe help reduce some long-standing inequities in generative AI access in healthcare diagnostics and personalized education.
But on the flip side, an equally strong, maybe even stronger risk that these same technologies could just make things worse, deepen those divides.
Precisely, which is why the paper really emphasizes the critical role of, say, the Congressional Black Caucus in shaping policy here.
They need a strategy to deal with all these complex, sometimes contradictory implications.
Yeah, it's a real moment, an opportunity for the CBC to steer AI development and regulation, to make sure Black Americans' needs and concerns aren't just an afterthought, but are actually central.
To try and harness the benefits while actively preventing the harms.
Exactly. And we've only scratched the surface today, really. The paper notes there are so many other areas: criminal justice, finance, housing, climate change, how government services are run.
All areas where AI's impact on Black communities needs that same careful look.
Definitely. It's an ongoing conversation.
So the final thought we want to leave you with is this. Think about how these potential impacts, the good, the bad, the complicated, intersect with your own understanding of fairness, of equity, of justice.
Yeah, what questions did this raise for you? What feels most urgent? It's something we all need to keep thinking critically about.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive today.